So hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar, the NVivo 14 webinar on thematic analysis using NVivo 14. So we're excited to show this to you today. To do some introductions, I'm Stacy Penna. I'm the Customer Engagement Enablement Director here at Lumivero. And I've been working with NVivo for over 10 years now. So we're excited to show you how you can use it with thematic analysis. And the trainer who's going to be showing you how to do that is Ben Meehan, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, hi everybody. So my name is Ben Meehan. This is my full-time job. All I do every day for the past 23 years is work with researchers. That's a full-time job. And we've been involved in training, consulting, and supporting all three domains over that period of time. So obviously, as part of the training brief, we work with Lumivero to promote the software through trainings and through online training, online courses. We facilitate some of those, and face-to-face courses and workshops as well. So we'll get to know each other a little bit more over the next hour, but that's probably all you need to know for now.
So just to let people know about Lumivero. So we were QSR International, and in January we became Lumivero. So we still develop NVivo, Citavi, and some of the new software that we added to the company is XLStat, which is statistical analysis software, so like SPSS, Sonia for student placements, at risk for risk management and decision tools. So just to give you a sense of what the company does is that we're working with this data landscape. So we want to help you as researchers aggregate and collect your data, organize the data, analyze it, report and present, and then also help you track and measure. So in NVivo 14, our product team worked hard talking to customers, understanding some of their challenges, and there were some key things that came out very clearly. So one was collaboration, so having a way to collaborate in real time. So we do have NVivo Collaboration Cloud now, and when you use that with NVivo 14, your research teams can collaborate on the same project, doesn't matter the operating system. So they also heard that working between Mac and PC can be challenging sometimes. So that's another reason to look at Collaboration Cloud, because it'll help you with that. And then to help you get more insights with your secondary resources, we have Citavi integration in NVivo. Citavi is a reference management and writing tool that will help you with your lit review. So what's new in NVivo 14? I mentioned real-time collaboration when you use NVivo 14 with Collaboration Cloud. Also, it's easy now to connect with Mac and Windows. So again, you need NVivo 14 and NVivo Collaboration Cloud to work in the same project, no matter what the operating system. Citavi Insights, and then also a way to simplify your account management with all of our products. So if you have Citavi, NVivo Transcription, NVivo Collaboration Cloud, you just have to get in with one password now, one account.
Okay, so that would be pretty consistent in terms of the team part with previous projects. So about a third of you seem to be working in some kind of a collaborative format. Now, today, we're looking at NVivo, but through a particular lens. We're looking at it through the lens of RTA, a reflexive thematic analysis, which is one of the most widely used methods. And where there are certain assumptions built into this presentation. One, that you've read Brown and Clark, or you understand at least at some level the practical steps and the conceptual philosophical underpinnings that go with thematic analysis. And two, that you have some level of, you may not, but that you have, we're not going to be teaching you here today how to set up a project. So we're kind of assuming that that's for another training session or something you already know. So we're not going to be talking to you about cases and classifications or anything else. And I suppose the issue really that raises is that what we're hoping that you get out of this today is an understanding of these tools and how they might be used in this method, but also in any method. So, you know, RTA is very popular, and it's one that many of you will use. But all of these tools could be used in multiple settings. So where the focus isn't on teaching you how to use the tools. So I'll be talking in the first stage about annotations and memos. And these are two widely used tools to use to integrate soft data into the primary data, and particularly when you're familiarizing yourself with the data. But they could appear in several stages throughout this process, and they could appear in other methodologies as well. So the focus won't be to teach you how to use a memo or an annotation. It'll be for you to have a shopping list, make notes, and maybe think about which of these tools you'd like to use, I think would be appropriate for your particular needs. So if you wanted to learn how to use any of these tools, if you don't already know, we would have videos, tutorials, and stepwise instructions. But that's a 2-day course, probably, if you put them all together back to back, to learn how to use all of these tools and build a database at the same time. So we're not going to be teaching that stuff today, but we can provide you with webinars. Now, just in terms of other webinars, there are webinars for how to set up a project. There are webinars for understanding cases and classifications, for working with literature, for doing RTA, and for visualizing your data, among others. So there will be plenty of other webinars like this, but also dedicated tutorial videos. So you've seen the email addresses there at the start. We will be making this PowerPoint available, and in fact the material that we're working with, it's a standard tutorial, but kind of rejigged it a little bit for RTA. You could get that on a project file on a download as well if you wish. So they're all possible. And of course, it'll be available on both platforms as well. So we'll put the email addresses up at the end as well. Now, Stacey is riding shotgun on the questions. So we may get questions, and you can post a question on the chat, and we will be recording the session, and you will get a link to the recording. I don't know how long it takes, it might take a day or two, but you will get a link to the recording at the end of this. If you post questions, we just don't know in these sessions how many. Sometimes you get a lot more questions than others. Stacey will answer the ones that she can now, or if there's a really burning one that maybe what she feels is a wider interest to the group, or could be explained maybe in a bit more depth by me if I might have glossed over something, then she'll put that out there as well. But we may not get to them all, but we will answer all questions. If you take the note of the email addresses and post your question there, anything following this, we will definitely answer and send resources. Now, I'm assuming, as I said, you're somewhat familiar with RTA, and Brown and Clark would be the seminal authors, and she pronounces her name Brown. She spells it like the German B-R-A-U-N, and it's very particular that you don't call her Braun. But Brown and Clark would be the seminal authors. They wrote a paper in 2006, which is one of the most cited papers in the world, setting out the guidelines for thematic analysis. And then they wrote another one in 2020, updating the 6 stages and processes. And they did that because they wrote a paper having a go, basically, at sometimes supervisors, PIs, and reviewers in particular, who often make ill-informed statements about RTA to students or to people publishing papers. So it was a bit of a rant in the sense it was 20 things never to say to a student. But in that paper, they renamed the 6 stages. So if you're going to do these 6 stages in NVivo, then you would probably cite both of those papers. Now, we'll move through these and look at the tools in NVivo in a second, but there is one other point that it's important to keep front and center when you're looking at these. This looks quite linear, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It isn't quite as linear as it seems there. It is more an iterative process. I might do some familiarization and write some notes. I might start my coding and realize I need to read a bit more reading and a bit more thinking about those codes. So I go back and I do a bit of this. But I am moving along a continuum. So eventually I will end up in phase 6, but it may be a bit of back and by. And it's designed to be reflexive and corrective. So I do a piece of work, I walk away, I have a think about it, and maybe write some notes and then come back. So if I were going to do this in NVivo, this is what it would look like. So the version we're using today is the new release, version 14, which was released about 3 weeks ago. But don't worry if you're on a slightly older version, NVivo 2020, but many of you probably are. It looks the same. There's no difference in the interface or in the menus. There are additions in version 14, but there's nothing changed fundamentally. So you'll be able to follow all this and do any of these on an older version. And of course, the Mac and Windows look quite alike in this version. So and in the previous one. So this would apply in equal measure to a Mac. And the only difference is the data we're going to use is the standard tutorial that comes shipped with NVivo. So you already have a copy of this. But if you prefer the raw data, if you want to see our copy as we've manipulated it, then we can make that available to you too, in both Windows and Mac format. And the only difference between this tutorial, I mean, there's your standard interviews all set up and ready to go. Your cases and classifications have all been set up. But down here are, under the coding area, are the 6 stages for Brown and Clark RTA. And we'll be working our way systematically through those and looking at the tools that you might want to use in that process. And the first stage isn't really a stage of coding. No codes in there because we're not coding until we hit phase 2. I put it in there as a folder just to remind you that it is a critical phase, but we'd be using 2 different tools in NVivo for doing that. If I just go back to the PowerPoint there for a sec. Sorry. Back into the PowerPoint. So in NVivo, this would be your familiarization and writing familiarization notes. That's phase 1. So you're immersing yourself in the data. These are usually verbatim transcripts, but they could be media files as well. And you might be thinking about some initial coding. The tools you'd use would be annotations, memos. You may be using NVivo transcription, or you may be transcribing yourself. Memos and mind maps. So you see the way some of these tools will appear in several stages of the process. Now, back in NVivo, what that would look like is I'd be up here in my interviews. I'd be opening up an interview and I'd be reading it and I'd be making notes. And the tool you choose is annotations for notes. And blue highlighting is an annotation. And if I click on it, the note will appear at the bottom of the page that's relative to that piece of text. So you see the note will change as I go through the different. So as I gather my thoughts and ideas, I can also add notes. Adding a note is a simple process. We have several videos for it, but most of the tasks we're going to show you today would not be too difficult to do. Can you upload web pages, PDFs? Yeah, so Stacey's working away on those questions. Okay, so that's the first piece. Now, apart from annotations, because an annotation is specific to a particular comment as I'm reading and familiarizing myself with the data, but there's also a memo. Now, a memo is a document. It sits down here in the notes area. It's one of 3 really important types of documents that capture soft data and integrate it. And you see we have subfolders here for the different stages of the process, because you'd be writing a lot of memos. And most methodologies, you know, if you look at the literature before there was ever technology, those books really only refer to 3 things: indexing, annotating, and memoing. So indexing is coding, we're coming to that. Annotating and memoing are how you integrate the researcher into the process. And you'll be doing it at different stages of the process. So I can look at the memos in here. I'm in phase 1. So I'm thinking about a list of initial codes and I might be documenting those, but I'm also writing a summary of Barbara's interview. I can open it here. If I go back up to my document, I can open it here as well. And if I just close this for a second, you'll see there's a little icon here that tells me, that Barbara has a memo attached. So I could systematically go through my interviews and keep them as separate linked memos. Now, if I wanted to open the memo, I can right click and open it here, or I can do Control Shift and M, and my memo will open up. And that's just a summary of Barbara's interview. So now I've got my specific notes and I've got my big picture summary, all linked to Barbara. So we're starting to work the case a little bit more, but it's all saved and linked and connected. So for the audit trail, what we'd be showing there would be screenshots of memos and annotations and explaining that process. It wouldn't be a coding folder. I just want to make a point about the audit trail, because one of the big benefits of using a tool like NVivo is the ability to show your workings. If I'm your extern or your reviewer and you've done RTA, I don't have your data. So as far as the findings are concerned, I have to take your word for it that the data says whatever you tell me it says. So the only way I can make a value judgment as to the veracity of this piece of research is by looking at your processes, not your outcomes. as an external reviewer myself, I wouldn't even read your findings if you hadn't convinced me the methodology they were worth reading in the first place. It's there that you get your credibility as a researcher, and by extension, trustworthiness and plausibility to the findings. So demonstrating rigor would be done through demonstrating each of these processes, these 6 stages, and the tools you'd use in phase 1 would be memos and annotations. Now, there are other tools in here as well. There's a mind map, and that can be useful for the more creative kind of lateral thinkers, as opposed to people who like to think in structured codes. And down here in this area under maps, we can have 3 different types of maps: project maps, concept maps, and mind maps. This would be a mind map because I don't have any data yet, so it's abstract from the data. But I can start thinking about and documenting in my memo the kind of coding I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about the research question, its changes in this community. What am I interested in? Well, I think, and this could be coming from my interview schedule as well, I'm interested in the community, I'm interested in the economy, I'm interested in the natural environment, and they have their own elements to them, like jobs and property values under economy. And I've got these 2 big picture items up here that I haven't connected to anything yet, like policy and tourism. So I've got a template here, and I can indeed, in fact, create these as a set of codes straight out of this mind map if I wish, and they would create that coding structure for me as actual codes that I could code to. So you could do this designing your interview schedule, or you could do it when you come back to the field, start thinking about your initial codes as we're doing in this example. So that's phase 1, and we're now ready to move from that kind of more passive interaction to more physical interaction with the data. We're going to start doing systematic data coding. We're going to deconstruct the data from its original chronology into an initial set of typically non-hierarchical codes. So this is often referred to as open coding or broad brush coding or initial coding, as they used to call it in the older versions of RTA. I'm going to use descriptors. It's important that I define my codes. That's referred to as a rule for inclusion. So when I'm coding, I give definitions against the code, which makes my code book much more impressive when I publish it for my audit trail, because now I can claim coding consistency. I didn't think water quality meant one thing today and something different tomorrow. And I can show that I had codes and I had definitions of codes. We might also do some searching, and we might be continuing to update our memos. And how that would look in NVivo would be like this. If I go back up to my codes here, we've now gone from familiarization to our initial codes. They're typically non-hierarchical because I'm not making an arbitrary decision that something is more important than something else. I'm not trying to organize higher level themes yet. I'm really just deconstructing the data. But I am using my descriptors, and they are important because I'm using their language. So they talk about aquaculture, and I need to explain what I mean by aquaculture so I'd be consistent when I'm coding against it. They can be published alongside the labels of your codes as well. And that's easily done in reports or code books, which you can export quite easily from NVivo to include the descriptors. So coding is a pretty straightforward process. I would go back up to my interviews. I would be working my way through them. So I open up Barbara, and then I go to my codes, and I develop I can add a new code here if I want to add a new one, or I take a comment of Barbara's. It might be everything she said there. It might be just some, and I would put that into whatever code I think it belongs. And I can see now that there's 2 interviews in renewable energy, and there's 16 comments in there. And if I don't like drag and drop, I can do right click there, and I can do code selection, and I get a picking list. And I can pick, well, actually, she's talking about balance, but she's also talking about the habitat and the landscape. So I can put that into several codes that way, or I can drag and drop. So the process isn't going to tax you too much. You'll get the hang of coding fairly quickly. Now, the other thing that's in phase 2 that we have on our slide there is a text search, because let's say I've coded a couple of interviews and I'm thinking, they're talking a lot about fishing. Let's see how pervasive that is in the other interviews. Or I may want to gather all those comments into a single code, make sure I don't miss anything. It's not going to stop me reading the transcripts. I still got to read them because they may talk about fishing and use a completely different terminology for it, but they often talk about fishing. So I'll go down and I'll do a quick search and explore phishing. So I'm going to make a new query. It's a text search. And I'm just going to type in, this is going to be a very simple, quick to run query. I'm going to type in fish. I'm going to stem it. So any word that shares the root of the word, so fishing, fisheries, would also turn up fishing. And I'll tell it where to look. I don't want to look into my own notes. I don't want to look at literature or policy documents, because I'd have everything in NVivo. It's a one-stop shop for my project. So I wouldn't just have my interviews in there. I'd also have my literature and be coding that thematically. That's a different webinar. But let's just say I'm going to search all these interviews for references to phishing. So it's not too many clicks to run it. And these are all the people who are talking about phishing. And I can see that particularly Charles, Dorothy, and Robert talk a lot about phishing, and the others less so. I can see the quotes. There they are. I can see all the comments. And I can see, and it's taking a minute to load because we found 104 comments there. And I can see what they are. I can see who's saying it. This is Barbara, but I can move down and look at other people as well. So there's Dorothy. And if I want to, I can drill down on that and see where in the document she's talking about phishing. And I can pull them in. I can pull them manually into my codes, or I could just save this as a code. I got my word tree. So I can see, well, they're talking a lot about phishing, but a lot of it is commercial phishing, because the word commercial frequently precedes the word phishing. The phishing industry comes up a lot. So they talk about phishing. I can see that. It's often commercial phishing and not recreational phishing. Tourists do that they're actually talking about. So I can get a handle on patterns of language use across larger data sets, which is particularly useful if you're working with bigger data sets like surveys, literature, or policy documents. So we're at some point going to run out of road with phase 2. I'm going to collapse those memos because I'm confusing them with my codes. So phase 2, there's my phase 2 codes now complete. And I'm now ready to move off into phase 3. So this is a bit more detailed now because we're developing and reviewing themes. So there's a few more tools coming into play here. I might decide to look at my coding stripes. I want to get a kind of an overview of where Barbara has gone, and I might decide to do that. So I'm going to go back into NVivo. Let's open up Barbara or Dorothy, and we can switch on our coding stripes. Now I could do this. Typically, I wouldn't do it for everything because my cases and all the different cycles of coding will be in there. I have a very cluttered view. So I'm going to go to my phase 3 because that's where I'm working now. And I'm going to select any codes that might be at play in there. I could just select the top level ones, or I might decide to view more here. I want to see everything. Now, I can see, for example, these comments in pink. The coding stripe will appear opposite the text to whatever code this has gone to. So it's gone to sense of community and the economy, the same comment, and that wouldn't be unusual. If I click on sense of community, it'll highlight anywhere in the document where Barbara talks about the sense of community in that color. And if I want to look at where they talk about the economy, it'll highlight that in pink, and I can see anywhere in that color where she's talking about the economy. So I can see what they're talking about, and I can see the extent to which they're talking about it. I can print these off and send them to my colleagues or supervisors as well. So the coding stripes are useful for getting a quick visual of what's going on. But as we actually move into phase 3, what we're really doing here is moving into a hierarchical structure. So in phase 3, where we've gone from just reviewing our codes, which we could do in either stage, and we could review the content of the codes themselves with coding stripes to see where else something has gone. People who talk about the economy, do they also talk about phishing? So I can do this across the board, but now we've gone from a non-hierarchical group of several 20 codes or something in here to a much smaller number of categories or initial themes. We have that down to 8 broad areas now that those codes are represented in. And you can see some of them will have more than one in them because they talk about the economy. So these 4 codes here would have started out as open codes and then got grouped into an initial theme because they all have something in common. They're all talking about the economy. Now, this is just moving codes around, and moving codes is very easy to do. I might decide I want tourism to be a top level code, so I move it out here, and it's now a top level code. So I could make the parent the child the parent. As my thinking evolves, my coding framework can evolve with me, and it can evolve several times. This is a reflexive, adaptive process, so I can decide, actually, no, that really is something about the economy, and I can drag it back in there. So I can rename, I can merge, I can reorganize, regroup, reposition, and code on. And I might stick on my coding stripes in agriculture to see how many people talk about agriculture, talk about landscaping. So these are the tools I'm organizing my codes as well as coding. I might be coding on. I might decide, some of these codes need to be broken down. We have a lot of stuff on the natural environment, so I want to break that down into more refined codes that basically explain the different perspectives, ideas, discussion areas around the natural environment. And because we can see here, we can actually weight them if I want. I can see, well, when it comes to the natural environment, water quality, that kind of element of that whole theme about the natural environment is dominating a lot of that conversation. So I can see the weighting of those codes, not absolute numbers. I'm not interested in the absolute numbers. I'm interested in the relative number. So it's the weighting of the code relative to other things. When they talk about this, they talk about this more. They're more animated. They've more, with more text, more data on it. So I'm using my coding stripes. I'm coding on. I might use a concept map as opposed to a mind map. Now, a concept map is a little bit different because it's a mind map is abstracted from the data. A concept map is all about the data. So I'm looking at development, and I want to look at the complexity of that relationship between and across those codes. And I'm thinking about broader concepts like outside influences and the balancing of tensions between tourism, let's say, and also the economy. So the tourism generates jobs, but it also could have an impact on the natural environment if they're all coming down fishing. And the fishing isn't being managed. So I'm looking at broader things, and I'm looking at the connectivity across and between some of these things. But there's a direct relationship between tourism and the infrastructure, and that's all influenced by policy management. So I'm thinking at a more analytical level, and I'm mapping these things. And of course, this is all going to inform my audit trail. So that's my concept map, my project map. Project map is the third type of map. I might just quickly show you one of those. It's all about the data. I can drag my coding framework in, and I can start to look at that in a hierarchical way. So I've got these groups of codes now, these initial themes, like the natural environment, the economy, and I've kind of balanced it now there on its own. It's not connected to anything because we're balancing all different things. So that's how it's looking right now. And again, I could send that off to colleagues, to my supervisors, to my team, and I can take a look at where we're at in terms of that kind of stuff visually, or I could do it from the code book. I could just send this off out in a table, and I could even put graphics and all those things on it if I wished, visualizations. So we're at a project map. Now this one is a really interesting area. You notice in the poll that a third of you today, and that's pretty consistent in many of these webinars, a third of you are collaborating. So you're doing thematic analysis, all right, but you're doing it in a team or with others. So there's a thing here called a coding comparison query first, which I want to just quickly talk about. I'm not going to demonstrate a coding comparison query in NVivo because it would need quite a bit of explanation in terms of how it works and Kappa's coefficient and the pros and cons of it and all of that. So most definitely, it's something we would have to do a separate session on, or you might send us an email. We would have webinars and videos on it. But it's controversial in the sense that some authors like these and some of them don't. And Brown and Clark are one of the ones that wouldn't be a big fan of this. But I know just from the training side that a lot of people do use it. Sorry, we're on phase 3. I just slid into the wrong slide there. Sorry, Monica. It's a coding comparison here. So a lot of people would do that. I just clicked on the slide that moved it on. So there's different views on it, and you want to check your philosophical underpinnings. But there are tools in NVivo for doing this, and it's globally recognized. The Kappa's coefficient, the one it uses, the formula it uses, as being valid by both quant and qual communities, because it does things like weight. It's a weighted score. It's not just the traditional way of measuring these things, which is percentages, which can give you, misleading outcomes. You and I might have 100% agreement on a paragraph, but disagree on the rest of the chapter or the rest of the document, whereas Kappa it's a weighted average across the document as a whole. But the reason I'm kind of skipping a little bit through coding comparison queries, because it raises another issue around working in teams, which is very important, particularly in the context of the new release of NVivo. So up to now, working in teams involved quite a bit of administration. You had to create shared folders in the cloud or on your own network. There was, if you worked within a network, there was an option to code within the network simultaneously, people collaborating on the same project, but that limits you to the network. So you can't collaborate with people in other institutions or other countries or other disciplines even sometimes. So the way people got around that up to now was a product called Collaboration Cloud, which was a shared folder that was in the cloud that people could assign roles to and users to, and they could take copies of that project, work concurrently in code at the same time, and then merge all of that stuff back in. But somebody had to take the ownership of merging the files. And if you're working across platform, those files had to be converted between Windows and Mac, as well as being merged into the master and then redistributed to the team. So there was a bit of administration involved, quite a bit, and quite a bit of risk too, because anywhere along that chain, somebody could mess up seriously and destroy your database unintentionally. But in version 14, they have made a serious change to Collaboration Cloud, and it's one of the best. I've seen some really good innovations in the last few years, like working with Excel has improved dramatically. But this is very important for that third of you who are going to be working in a collaborative environment. And what that means essentially is that you now you make your database, you put it in the cloud. And this is an add-on. It's a subscription that you would add on to your NVivo. You don't have to do this. You could work in the traditional way if you want. You put this in the cloud, and your colleagues they clone this project. This is actually a cloned project we're working in today. And they can work on their own machines, be they Mac or Windows, in their own countries or outside of the network, anywhere they are. And everything they do is synchronizing back up to the cloud and then across to the other devices. So yesterday, when I was preparing for this session, I added a memo to Barbara's interview. Stacey opened up her project file this morning, and there it was linked. So we don't have to merge. It's seamless. And even if Stacey was disconnected from the internet for an hour or two or for a day, I'd be working away. But when she connects again, it's just going to synchronize those changes. And I can assign roles to users. I can prevent them from accidentally screwing up the database, because I could make you a collaborator, which means you can do all the things you need to do. You can code, you can add codes, you can add memos, but you couldn't delete a code. So you couldn't mess things up unintentionally. And I assign those permissions. So that's a really good innovation. Now, that's a whole separate webinar. We do them on them, but you might want to sign up for one of those if you think that's the way you like to work. It is very seamless now towards what it used to be. So we're in phase 3, and we've looked at concept maps. I'm going to circle back to a matrix because it will turn up again a little bit later on, so maybe I'll come back to that. There are reports that we could run. And there's a suite of reports down here in the whole reporting area. And there are some out-of-the-box ones, which are quite comprehensive, and then there's others that you might want to customize. You can do that too. So I can run a file. I want to see an interview, and I want to see how it's coded, or several interviews. Just want to see the codes and comments that's gone in there, or I want to see a code and see what interview and segments of interviews have gone in there. So, I mean, just to quickly run one just to show you. There's filters applied to this that I can assign. So I can say, I don't want to see every interview. I just want to see certain ones. So I can go here to my interviews area. Let's just take Barbara and Charles. We'll keep it simple. And I can go here to, and I might want to see every code. I might want to see a particular phase of the process. We're in phase 3 here. So I can decide I want to see, I just do it on a couple of codes just to show you. I'll take the economy and I'll take the related codes as well. But I could do this on everything. I could do it on all interviews as well. And it'll run pretty quickly. Gives it to me in a format. It's a bit like a PDF, so I can do different things with it. I can just takes a sec to come up. So I get this kind of thing like a PDF, you know, like the thumbnails. I just remove those just to simplify the screen. And I get a report map here. So this is Barbara. There's all the coding for Barbara. There's the codes Barbara has gone to. And if I want to see what she said about aquaculture and fishing, it'll take me straight to that part of the report. So I get, and I'll switch that off just to show you as well. I get this document. It shows me, go back up to the top. This is the code. It's Barbara's interview. It's where she talks about the economy, and there's the comments. So, and I can see that there's several comments in there from Barbara. So they can be customized as well. Takes a little bit of, you might need to do a little bit of training around customizing them, but they are useful, and there's quite a few of them that will run straight out of the box. And they're mostly summaries and that kind of thing. So back here, we've now looked at coding reports. We've seen list view, so you can show how I can look in the hierarchical structure, and I can see in phase 3, I can see, well, you know, when they talk about the natural environment, just going to do a quick visualization on that, just on the hierarchy itself. So I get a tree map. It gives me basically a box that says, you know, and I can apply different color schemes. This is what, these are the elements of the natural environment, and you can see that water quality and the habitat would be quite dominant among those. Or I prefer a sunburst, so I can drill down on the natural environments and I can see the different codes. And again, it shows that water quality is coming up quite a bit. So I can see it here in kind of more tabular form, and I can see it here in a more visual form. And some people love those visuals and some people hate them. They think they're too positivist, others think they're great. So, but they're there and they're available. So I'm combining all of these things. I'm writing my memos. I'm looking at my mind maps and my concept maps, and I could publish a code book. I mean, just to show, if I wanted to share this with my colleagues, I could do a code book. I could do export, I just click on the folder, export codebook, and I can decide just give me phase 3 or everything. Include the number of files and references, or don't. Some methods prefer to see the numbers and some don't, so it depends on the methodology. That's going to throw that stuff straight into Word for me. It's going to give me kind of a nested table. It's going on the other monitor there. So I've got my report now. So there's my parent codes, my child codes, my descriptors. And I can see how much data these various codes are drawing relative to each other, and I can present that in a tabular form or in a graphical form as well. So all of these things are now informing, you know, my initial themes, and now I'm ready to start reviewing those in a bit more depth. Now, a lot of these tools will come up again in the same process because I'm just moving through. I'm reflecting. I might be copying all the codes down into a new folder. I might do some merging, renaming, distilling, and clustering related codes into bigger themes. And I might be, as part of that review, coding on, drilling down. I work the data till I feel I've gotten what I needed from it in terms of identifying these themes. There are some diagrams in there that I might want to run, and I might want to run a matrix. So if I go in here, I can take, let's compare the economy and the natural environment. I just want to see, you know, to what extent these things are impacting on each other. Or I might want to see, yeah, but we'll just take those two. It doesn't really matter what, just an example. But I want to compare those two. So I can do a visualize here, and I can do a comparison diagram. Now that just takes these two codes and it looks at their representation, where there are common interests or where they're unique to one or the other. Now, if I get this as cases or files, but today I'm going to use cases because we have files as well, but some of the files are focus groups in the study, and we have more people than we have files. So I want to see it at the level of the individual, the person. Now, what that shows me, because there's a survey in here as well, so there's quite a few cases, is that for most of my participants, there is a lot of crossover. When they talk about the natural environment, they talk about the economy too. All of those cases in the middle have raised both. The guys who are out here on the right are uniquely concerned about the economy, and the guys on this side are uniquely concerned about the natural environment. So these kind of tools help me to just form views and form my memos. And this is another one these kind of visualizations are very quick and easy to run. You get the videos, you won't be too long learning these. But this one would allow me to do a cluster analysis where people talk about the natural environment. Where is there overlap in their thinking across these different elements of the natural environment? So I run this thing. It's a dendrogram. Now, what this is telling me is that people who talked about the environmental impacts also talked about water quality. The landscape formed around all of those. The people who talk about landscape include in the environmental changes, and within that, environmental impacts and water quality. People who talk about the ecosystems also talk about the habitats. And some of these might be glaringly obvious, and some of them may not, but you wouldn't be aware of those clusters when you're coding. You wouldn't be aware of what's building up in the background that could inform some of this. Items matched in the dendrogram would be in the higher levels of clusters, and items matched in color would be in the highest levels. And there's different formats up here I can present these in, 3D formats and various other things. And if I wanted to see what they're saying about the ecosystem, that when they're also talking about, this will take me in and it will highlight and put on the coding stripes to show me codes that are overlapping between those things. So I can see the pattern at this level, and then I can see what might be behind that in terms of the overlap between the habitat and the ecosystems. So they're all the different tools that I might be using. I might want to run a matrix. A matrix is really useful because I'm coding for, I'm just going to go down here to my matrices. I'm going to just open one that's stored already because I'd like to have time, but we don't really have enough time to go through running one. But we have some of them saved in here. So this is the natural environment by community. This is, I'm coding for sentiment, and this is the attitudes to commercial fishing. So I could open either of those. This is the economic issues age by age range. So there's crosstab queries and matrices, which are two sides of the same coin. This is my phase 4 codes, which we're now in. If I open these up, they're split out by the communities. So this is a crosstab. Crosstab is just a matrix with two variables. So I can have both. It's only actually run on one, but I can have two. I'll show you the one that's run on two now in a second. But so you can see here that these are the different communities, and these are the different contributions coming in from the various communities across. I can start comparing communities. This is one on fishing. It's a standard matrix. So these are the same communities now, and the extent to which they're positive or negative or neutral when it comes to fishing. So I can see that, in this area here, it's predominantly negative when it comes to fishing. But over here, we've got some more positivity when it comes to this area, as perhaps there's more fishing involved in that area. So I can intersect codes with other codes with demographics, codes with sets or groups, communities, different kinds of cases, even individual documents. I could do an in-case and cross-case analysis by putting all the interviews in there against the various themes. So I could be doing all of these to see what kind of patterns exist in my data that might be informing my analysis. So all of these are now informing phase 4. As we move through then into phase 5, I suppose back in NVivo, it would look like this, because we're getting down to the business end now, because we're going from codes to categories, to refined categories, to reviewing and refining again, to defining, refining, and naming themes. So we've gone here, we have 7 themes here. That's come down to 4. Now, in many of their videos and books, Brown and Clark often refer to letting go of a theme, and that it's actually their experience as academics would be that for their own students, that's quite a difficult thing for them to do. Students find it hard to let go of a code. I remember years ago sending my own students to go and take a walk on the beach and come back to me when they're doing 1 PhD because they're doing 3 at the moment. So, you can get so immersed in the data that it's very hard to stand back and you're so passionate about the topic area generally that it's hard to let go. But we've decided now that we're identifying, refining, defining, and naming 4 themes: community, development, the economy, and the natural environment. And within them, there are elements. Brown and Clark tend to dislike the term sub-themes. You could call them other things, but these are the elements that are informing the themes. So when it comes to the development, balance between the economy and the natural environment. Infrastructure is important, as is policy. So I now have this kind of a structure, and having refined, defined, and named, and the same tools that we were looking at earlier on are all in play here now. But having refined, defined, and named, my phase 5 is really just managing them and collapsing them into these final themes. There's not so much involved in the analysis and write-up until we get to phase 6. This is just a view of what's going on in phase 5. It's really just consolidating all the work we've done up to now and maybe losing a few themes and renaming and finally refining and defining. But now we're into analysis and write-up, and almost all of these themes and these tools will come back into play. Most of them we've had a very quick look at. I'm just keeping my eye on the time. I don't want to run out completely, but we do need to have there's a couple of ones in there that I might quickly show you. So we've seen some of these, but the framework matrix is one that comes up. Now, this isn't to be confused with framework analysis, which is a Ritchie and Spencer in 1994. It's a whole other method and it has its own stages and cycles. But one of those stages is a thing called the framework grid. And some people like to use it in other methods as well. Generally, anything that involves phenomenology, because we're looking at the lived experience and we're trying to look at the individual and then maybe look at cross case as well. Down here, we've saved one for you just to give you a very quick flavor for framework matrix. So how this works is, just going to open up one. We have it running, ready to go. How this works is that it's like an in case and cross case analysis. I'm just going to widen this column a bit so you can see a bit more. So each row is a case. It's a person in this example. So Barbara. Each of my themes defined and named now is here. And you can see this is, it's the 4th area and it's the first area within that. So it's my sub theme, if you want to call it that. Now, when I click into this cell, first of all, I can auto summarize. So when I click into auto summarize, what it will do is it will populate these cells with everything that Barbara said about water quality and everything she said about the habitat, up to a limit. If there's too many, it'll truncate. It just depends on the size of the dump, but it's a summary. It's just give me a handle. But I don't need it particularly, because when I click into each cell, it will show me on the right. If I just switch the view here to cell content, it will show me on the right anything that Barbara said about the water quality. So I see it all here on the right-hand side, and I can write a summary here. You can actually write into this. So, and I can physically highlight any area in Barbara's documents that it will remind me where I took that from. There's the different references to water quality. And I can export this into Excel. So reading it across is my in-case analysis for Barbara, for each of her major themes. Reading it down is her cross-case analysis. And then I summarize my summaries, and that becomes my findings. So it's a data reduction strategy, but it's similar to memos. You could do memos with a very similar thing as well, but it's one that some people like to use, and it's readily available in NVivo. So we've seen, I think, at a very quick glance at most of these. There's one here just very quickly, and then we'll kind of have to wrap it up because time is against us. But just to show you here, when people talk about, and it could even be at an earlier stage when people talk about change, right? So I can see here that community change is talked about quite a bit. There's 62 different comments coming from 18 different documents. So they're talking about community change. And of course, if I open this up and I can write my summary in my memo, then I can summarize what people said about community change. But now I want to know who's saying it. This assumes you understand the concept of cases and classifications. So if you don't, you might need to look that up or do some training around that area, because you would have to set that up in your database. It's part of the setup. But if I did, I could just now do a quick visualization on who's talking about community change. And I can go into my people cases and I can take age group or gender or any of these characteristics of my cases. I can take out anything that's unassigned or not applicable, and I can see where's the data coming from when it comes to community change. And what that tells me is it seems to be coming from the older age group. So this isn't uniformly represented. It's definitely older people are placing a greater emphasis on discourse around community change. It seems to be impacting them more. Now, I know that this age group have said the most, but if I want to know what they're saying more than this age group, but it could be more of the same, or it could be something completely different. I can drill down into that part, and there's the comments. Those highlighted comments are that age group talking about community change. So, and of course, this could just mean I've got more older people in my study. But if I go down here to my case classifications, and these would all be informing my memos at the various stages. But if I go down here to my case classifications, they'll be under here. And if I take that same attribute or characteristic, and I visualize it for everyone in the study, the whole population, I can see I have quite a balance, quite a range of age ranges in my study. In fact, this group would be one of the smaller ones, but not when it comes to community change. And all that's going into my memos and informing my analysis as I move through the analytical gears as I'm going through my 6 stages of Brown and Clark. These are just kind of a summary of the different, I suppose, the elements of coding, and these are the different tools for each of those in NVivo. So you're coding, you're using notes, you're running queries, visualizations, and reports. And that will be in the slide if you want to later on to see as well. Now, I'm just keeping my eye on the time. Any burning questions there, Stacey, or will I just move through the last few slides?
Let's go through those slides real quick, and then I've been trying to answer some as we go, but some I'll give to you in a second.
Okay, I wasn't really looking at the questions there, so go fire away there.
Yeah, so one thing I did want to point out, people asked what kind of data can come into NVivo. So you can see from the slide, pretty much any unstructured data. We do have an integration with Qualtrics. There was a question with that. So you can bring your surveys right from Qualtrics. Video, audio, images, web pages, really everything.
Okay.
And we talked about collaboration cloud. So this is a great new feature. You can bring your project up the cloud, collaborate in real time, whether you have a Mac or PC, it doesn't matter, and your team can work together. It's secure, so because it's in the cloud, it's on Microsoft Azure. We have several locations for servers, and it's GDPR and HIPAA compliant. And again, with Mac, we can go through these. Yeah, we won't go into all that, but we'll keep going down. So I'll put the link to the more webinars we have. We have one on how to use NVivo with Chat GPT. That's coming up in June. Next slide. Here are some free resources. That's part of the PDF. So feel free to go in and it'll help you learn more about how to use NVivo. The community. So I put a link in and I'll do it again. This is a great resource for you to learn more about NVivo, connect with people that are doing qualitative research. We have resources on how to learn, quick videos. NVivo, Ben's one of our contributors on the discussion board. He's in there quite often helping people answer questions about NVivo. And I think that's it. Yeah, these are the different products. And we'll go to some questions, Ben. So Veronica, hi Veronica, had a question. How were the coding structures in each folder created? For example, did you copy the codes from the previous phase of analysis and work from there?
A combination of things. So we would have copied codes down that we're moving forward and we're sticking with, but some of them might have got coded on in the next phase. Some of them might have got merged or renamed, and some of them might have been. So you see here, like some of these codes will turn up under our final themes down here, but they move through the gears, and it's not just moving codes into categories and then categories into themes. Some of that might involve coding on or cross-coding. I open up development and I realize when they talk about development, they're also talking about community. So I code across to those. So the short answer to your question is you copy the codes down and then you make your changes. And the reason you're not making the changes in the previous folders is to preserve your history and your audit trail. So it's thought progression we're trying to show in an audit trail. So as you go from the raw codes all the way up to your refined, defined, and named themes, there's a history there. When you publish your code book, you're making two statements to the reviewer or to the academy. One, I did the work. I didn't just say I did it. Here's the evidence of the work. Two, I did it in a manner consistent with the guidelines from a recognized set of processes in literature, Brown and Clark or Brown and Clark in this case. So I'm already meeting and indeed exceeding an academic and publishing standard. So that's, if that's all you used NVivo for, to be honest with you, that can be the difference between not publishing and not publishing. That's enough. But all these other tools then are all icing on the cake, and they can give you a much different views of the data and better analysis to come.
And I just want to say people, so I think people are asking, can you literally copy and paste the codes from one phase to another? Yes, you can. So that's one of the great things about NVivo. I can, and I did this with my dissertation. I decided what were the key codes I needed to really concentrate in writing about. So you can copy them and paste them in folders, and it helps you organize not only this method, but and other methods too, to help you or be able to not only explain how you're coding, but also to get to the key themes that you'll be writing about.
And you can also aggregate. So I can decide to switch on aggregation here. This could be an empty code initially. It's one of my higher level themes, my initial themes or whatever it is. And I move my codes from the earlier round underneath it. But now I can see totality at this level, but I can also still see all the elements, and I still have a history of which codes inform that category. And that means I can also compare at category level. I can see which categories, as well as the codes below them, are actually drawing more data. You can call them categories, you can call them initial themes. They're pretty much the same thing.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. This person's asked twice, so I'll ask, how best to utilize the annotation option so as to look across the notes back and forth?
Yeah, well, there's a number of ways I can do it. As I'm working through individual documents, I can see our codes. If I've already coded this data and I'm reading through my code, say writing a memo, anything that's been annotated will be highlighted for me. And I can switch the notes on or off whether I want to see them or not, but they'll be highlighted. And if I click into a note, it displays here, and it actually does a nice little pop-up on the Mac. But I also have them down here in my notes area. So if I wanted to look at that, kind of flip it on its head and look at it the other way, if I go down here to notes, annotations, I can see Barbara was annotated 3 times, and I can drill into any of those and I can see the note and the piece of text it was annotated with. And in text searches, I can include my notes. So supposing they're talking about water quality, but they're not using that term. They're talking about sewerage or some other terminology for water quality. And I'm making notes, this is about water quality. I can search my own notes, but not only pull my note, but pull the piece of text where the person actually said it, even though they didn't use that word on a text search. So the annotations are critical. And if you look at, it's not just Brown and Clark that talk about annotations. IPA, Interpretive Phenomenological Analysis, the first stage of coding is called initial coding and noting. It's the same with Brown and Clark, it's the very first stage of the process, but it continues all the way through. So they're a very critical part, both philosophically and then practically as you're working the data. And the software makes that whole process much more user-friendly and transparent.
Great. So thank you, Ben. I'm just putting a link to the more webinar. So we have a short survey at the end of this, if you don't mind filling that out, everyone. And if we didn't answer a question and you really need that question answered, please email me and we'll get to that. But thanks, Ben. Great session. A lot of positive comments.
Yeah, so the email addresses are there because often the idea comes to you after you've seen the webinar or you just didn't get the question answered. So anything to do with how to do anything, the training side, you could certainly ping me and any questions, and we'll send you resources, and we would have lots of them. And they're free. And there's lots of paid ones you can do, paid structured courses as well, but these ones are free. And anything to do with, I suppose, the more management side of things, the network itself, the software, licensing, any of those areas, and Stacey would answer those, or both of us, but that's just kind of a division of labor, if you like.
That's good. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Take care.